Hello, and it's welcome back again to Joy to the World, and this is day 4. Now, I hope you've got your seatbelts fastened because today you will certainly need it. I'm going to begin with a story. Once upon a time, the story of the Bible was really well known. After all, for many people, it was the only book they had. And in a time before 100 channels of high-definition satellite TV, unlimited internet sites, and a zillion computer games, people read the Bible for pleasure. The result of this is that carol writers could, and did, make reference to all sorts of things that now have us wondering. Think, for instance, of one of our oldest Christmas hymns. It's actually my favourite. I say that about all the carols, but this one I first sang in Portsmouth Cathedral over 50 years ago, and when I first heard it I was blown away. Now let's carry on with this, which may be over 900 years old. Let's look at the first verse alone. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lowly exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. A not unreasonable sequence of questions would include, who is Emmanuel? Why is he going to ransom captive Israel? And why are they mourning in lonely exile here? And that's just the first verse. First, let's think briefly about Emmanuel, a name that appears in a number of carols. Of course, it means God with us. Given that most of our problems come from our separation from God, the idea that the coming deliverer will allow God to be with us is the very richest of promises. But hang on, what about the exile and captivity bit? The central Bible narrative is about how the human race rebelled against God and became enslaved to evil. And that's what we spoke about yesterday. We are enslaved to the evil one. But in his mercy, God chose to rescue the human race and began by choosing one man, Abraham, and from him his descendants created a special people, the Jews. For over 2,000 years, God communicated with his people, who had come to be called Israel, through teaching, prophecies and discipline. The relationship between God and his people was for the most part strained, but briefly the people obeyed and God blessed them. At the time of King David and his son King Solomon, God's people lived God's way in God's land. They were, if you like, the glory days. But the glory days were only a few decades. The rot set in. Once more, God's people disobeyed him, and for some 6 centuries before the birth of Christ, Israel was taken into captivity in Babylon. Although around 70 years later, God's people were released and returned back to the promised land. The good old days, however, never returned. At the time of Jesus' birth, 5 centuries later, God's people still felt they were in captivity and mourning in lonely exile here. Like any hostage, they desperately needed someone to come and ransom them. They looked forward to the Redeemer who would ransom them, the one who they called the Messiah, or, to use the Greek, the Christ. So, what does this mean for us? Good question. The main point is that we should rejoice because God has kept his promise to his people. It's an encouragement to us all to hang on in there with God. He may take his time, but he will deliver. He has always done so in the past, and he will do so in the future. Now, get those seatbelts on. You will need them for the following song.